Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I know today is Mother's Day, and I guess, what do I guess? I don't guess, I'm not guessing anything. I miss my mom. My mom died in 2020 during COVID. And so she didn't die of COVID, but we couldn't visit her in the hospital while she was there for the last few weeks of her life. One of my sisters did eventually. So I hope everybody has whatever kind of Mother's Day, whoever you are, whatever you are, that you have. And I am I feel very sad and feel fortunate to have had my mom. Uh, I think the one thing to say about her, don't worry, it's not going to be 2 hours on my mom. I don't think I could do that. Uh, is that, well, she never really, how do I say this? She wasn't really expecting her son to become an herbalist and didn't really think there was any money to be made. My mom comes from, there was some money in the family, meaning like middle-ish, lower middle class growing up. Um, but she was definitely from a depression era and wanted her kids to be financially well off. But as she saw that I was really interested in herbalism, she was supportive. And the way that she was supportive, you could write it in the chat if this happened to you, is that she would send me newspaper articles about herbal medicine. They were like very simple articles, like chamomile would make it into whatever paper she was reading, something I'd learned about chamomile, like 30 years previously to that. But, it was clear that the idea of her sending me that was that she's supporting me, that this is what I was doing. And as it became more of a livelihood, she enjoyed it more. So I guess thank you, moms and mom dads and dad moms and children, everybody, for whoever you support in your life. So my name is Seven Song, and today's class is going to be about practical herbs that you can use at home. And um, I want to say what it's going to be about and what it's not going to be about. Because I'd like to cover a bunch of plants, I'm not going to cover wild crafting, except in little tidbits. I'm not going to cover medicine making. I'm not going to really cover dosages or even preparations. What I want to do is just discuss a bunch of plants that I regularly use. Some of them are common, some of them are less common, that I would like people to know about, coming from my mind, coming from working as a clinical herbalist, and herbs that I find effective pretty regularly. So that's what today's class is going to be. I don't have anybody else helping me, so there's nobody looking at questions or sorting them out. I'll try to look at them every once in a while. But I'm going to go for a while. I'm going to cover a bunch of herbs. If you have a question, you can write it, and I will try to look at them every once in a while. Well, Ajo, Arizona. I've been there. So first, warning or a disclaimer. It's really easy to do harm. I mean, of course, there's a lot that you can do good. And so whenever I give a class like this, I just want to really be clear. Like, if your diagnosis or assessment is not good, and you give herbs to somebody, they can get sicker. So just, learn your assessment skills. If you already are a diagnostician of some sort, that's very helpful. And sometimes it's just really important to go to conventional medicine and to get a diagnosis. You don't have to necessarily take the medicine, but sometimes we all know the ins and outs of the medical system. I just want to be clear that I'm giving a bunch of herbs, and I want to make sure that people do their due diligence when they're treating yourselves or those around you. That's really the main point of this. What else to say? So I run a school. If you think that I'm a good teacher for you, I run the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine. That's here in Ithaca, New York. It's, except for these occasional classes, everything is live, with live people doing live things. And I'm only going to be doing it for a few more years. I turned 67 this year. I have a few more years of running the school. So the next year I'm going to run the school is 2026. And so if you're interested, the program is starting to fill up. but you can read the description. All the information is on my website, sevensong, that's my name, .com. And also, I put up an herbal database recently. And if you want to see what the information on the herbal database, again, it's if you just go to my website, sevensong.com, you can look at it. And speaking of the database, I'm not going to cover all the safety considerations for all the plants I'm going to be talking about today. But I finished a lot of the information on the database on safety information. So let's say I'm talking about chamomile and I didn't talk about any problems about chamomile. If you go to the database, which is free, you can just go to the safety section and see what I have written. There's only be a couple of sentences, but I'm very clear about what is scary, what is reasonable, the adverse reactions that one might find with any particular plant. Here we go. So these plants will be in botanical scientific name order, but also give the common name. So if you're just wondering how I'm going down from A to Z, it's by the botanical names, sometimes called Latin names. So the first one is Calamus, also known as Acorus calamus, also known as Jim McDonald's favorite herb. And it is a really useful plant. I will say about it, it's actually pretty easy to grow if you land like where I live is very wet. Calamus is a pretty easy, can actually get a little bit weedy. So one thing to consider if you can get some rhizomes and replant them around your house. So I wouldn't put them near a garden or anything though. They spread by underground rhizomes. So Calamus has two main functions that I'm going to talk about here. One is digestive, and one is about mental health. So for the rest of today in this class, when I say mental health, I know it's a tricky term, emotional health, psychological health, mental health. I'm going to use the term mental health and then just describe all the things that what I consider fall under the rubric of mental health. So first, Calamus has a number of different flavors to it. It's bitter and it's astringent, and it's pretty good for what you might call like torpid digestive issues. Things like gastroparesis, or just the feeling like if you ever eat food, hopefully we all eat some food, when you eat food, and it feels like it just sits in your stomach, right? So you eat it, and then you just feel heavy in your belly for a while. Calamus is pretty helpful that way. It's a very strong tasting herb, so try small amounts initially. It's also quite aromatic, and people sometimes describe aromatic as dispersing or warming. So we have astringent, bitter, and aromatic all in the same. So basically, it's just useful for sluggish digestive disorders. It's not a good laxative. It doesn't really help pooping. It helps more the transit and breakdown of food in your digestive tract. So you can also use it along with other herbs if you're just somebody who is very gassy or bloaty after eating food. That's going to happen a little bit later down the GI tract. So Calamus is probably best taken right before you eat. So if you know you're going to eat something, maybe it's heavy, maybe it's oily, maybe it's just you just in general have sluggish digestion and things sit in your belly for a while, do something like 5 to 10 drops of the tincture. You can also use the glycerite. Again, takes a small taste versus a very strong flavor. And you can also take some after you finish eating. The one thing about it, after you eat it, if you take Calamus, then the flavor of Calamus will be the dominant flavor. Whatever you ate is now covered up by the very strong flavor of Calamus. The next function of Calamus, and this is probably what it's more well known for, is what I use it more for. It's one of the few plants I know that will help with focus and concentration without stimulation. So like everything else I'm going to talk about, it's not going to help everybody's focus or concentration, but I find it pretty helpful. I run an herb school, and many of the students just have a hard time focusing without giving any labels to anybody. And if they take a few drops of Calamus, I don't know, it just kind of kicks up people's focus a little bit better. And again, without being so stimulating that you want to get up and move around or feel agitated. I use it frequently for lack of focus, lack of concentration, disruption of memory, particularly after injury or illness. So let's say you had Lyme disease or COVID or any virus really, and then you recover from it. You no longer feel it in your lungs, but you feel like a small sense of loss in your ability to retain information or your ability to be present. Calamus can be helpful. In this situation, you would take it every day though, right? So if you're just trying to help with your digestion, you could just take it as needed. If you're trying to take it for just like immediate focus, maybe you're listening to me on Mother's Day and it's hard to listen to one person without any visuals, just talking into a camera here. You might take a few drops throughout the next hour and a half or 2 hours. But if your memory or concentration or focus has been disrupted, and it's kind of stayed that way, then it's really helpful to take it, once or twice a day, depending on your sensitivity to herbs. So Calamus is really helpful. It blends very well with ginkgo and Gotu kola and rosemary. So like a really nice formula. So this is like a classic, my cognitive function. Cognitive just means memory, mind, concentration, focus. You had Lyme, or really any disease, or even an injury, and now it's just harder to do it. A really nice formula is what I just said. It's kind of Calamus, Gotu kola, rosemary, and ginkgo. And it's a pretty safe formula. Again, anybody can have an idiosyncratic or an individual reaction to an herb. The last place that I occasionally use Calamus is when I do first aid and somebody's had a traumatic event. Maybe they were bit by a dog, they were in some kind of accident, and they want to ground. Like initially, after you've had a traumatic event, often a bit of spaciness right afterwards could be helpful. It just kind of allows you to not feel the pain as the adrenaline is rushing through. But at one point, grounding can become important. And for this, I really like to use a couple of drops of Calamus. So Calamus could be a kind of a grounding herb after some kind of trauma. I mean, of course, you have to work with the trauma as well. So that's Calamus. Yeah. If you want to see how brave you are, see how much, if you get some rhizome, the underground structures that go horizontal to the soil line, you can start chewing some rhizome and see how far you get. You can have the Calamus challenge, and you could be the new TikTok whatever word, new TikTok influencer with your Calamus challenge, Calama challenges. That's Calamus. The next one is black cohosh. There are two species of black cohosh that are used interchangeably in the US. They're actually distinct. If you live in Appalachia or up here in the Northeast, you'll notice that one Calamus flowers more in August and one Calamus flowers more in September. I'm sorry, black cohosh. Just reverse what I just said about Calamus. I mean black cohosh. And so the black cohosh that flowers earlier, that's Actaea racemosa. And the black cohosh that flowers later and also has slightly different flowers, that's Actaea podocarpa. I think I've never seen any, like the books don't talk about Actaea podocarpa. They look very similar, and I think they're just used interchangeably, though there's really very little science on that second species. And I'm not really sure, my guess is people gather both of the rhizomes, again, underground structures, indiscriminately. So back to black cohosh. So it's the rhizome that's used. And this is another plant, like if I've gathered it in the wild, which I have in places where it's super abundant, I bring some home and I'll plant it. And now I have pretty much enough growing here. And black cohosh will grow in full sun or full shade. It's not choosy from really the whole large parts of the eastern part of the US. So I'll get a rhizome, and I break off, and I keep the area that has a sprout on it, and then I just replant that. You can also replant it if you gathered it someplace, so you don't kill the plant because you're gathering the underground structures. Black cohosh has two very distinct two or three very distinct medicinal aspects to them. The first is as a skeletal muscle relaxant. So black cohosh is used for basically tight neck, tight hips, tight lower back. It's not an anti-arthritic, so it's not really used for joint pain or wrist pain. It's more for the tension that people hold. Now, of course, there are many reasons people hold tension, and often a plant is not enough to disperse that tension, but it is one of the herbs that I do use pretty regularly. It will sometimes help with lower back pain, usually not sciatica unless there's a lot of tension pinching the sciatic nerve. Um, but I just want to say that lower back pain is kind of universal and very difficult to treat. But black cohosh can be one of the herbs to use for lower back pain. A plant to mix with black cohosh is a plant called pedicularis. Pedicularis. Then you could, I'm not going to cover pedicularis, but those two together make a really nice combination. You would want to be very careful using black cohosh. If you're pregnant, I would suggest not using black cohosh if you're pregnant, unless you're working with a knowledgeable midwife and they think it's acceptable. And that's the main place, because we'll talk about its secondary effect. So black cohosh initially is a good skeletal muscle relaxant, particularly for the shoulders and back. That's why I find it helpful for relaxation. You know, you might also use other herbs that help the mind relax, like kava, which we'll get to later. And the one other place about using it, so when I do first aid, often people will pick things up quickly, like something heavy. They'll bend down and, won't bend from the knees, but bend from the back and pick it up and get that. If you've ever had that, where you pick something up and you can almost hear the noise of that kind of your back going out of kilter, black cohosh can be really helpful there. Take it as soon as possible. So in other words, you go to pick something up or you bend and you stand back up and you feel like the pain starts coming on. That's a good time to start cohosh. The next use is gynecological. So black cohosh helps with a couple of gynecological issues. The first one to mention is that it's one of the better herbs for hot flashes. So for during menopause, black cohosh can be used for hot flashes. Often people will have to keep it next to where they sleep, because often people wake up with hot flashes. So with black cohosh and hot flashes, you can take it kind of just as needed. You feel a hot flash coming on, or you're in the middle of a hot flash. But better to actually take it a few times a day and then take it if you're having a hot flash. So if you're in menopause and you're having regular hot flashes, you might want to take black cohosh 2 to 3 times a day, often with other herbs. And then if you're just having a lot of hot flashes at once, take some then as well. It can also be helpful for amenorrhea, or, for some reason your menstrual cycle has stopped, whether it's due to stress, and then of course you want to use herbs for stress, or virus, or some other, whatever has happened that's caused amenorrhea or a stoppage or much less menstrual periods. Black cohosh can be helpful. It's not really clear how it works. It doesn't look like it works directly on estrogen, but has a secondary effect on estrogen in the body. I also use it for PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. PCOS is often an elevated testosterone problem, so black cohosh will only be one of many herbs that can be used for PCOS. And like everything else I'm talking about, most of these issues are not easily resolved with herbs, drugs, lifestyle, diet. I mean, many of these things have multiple factors needed to input to help people get better. What I'm saying here is I don't want people to think that black cohosh is going to be the answer to everybody's PCOS, hot flashes, or skeletal muscle pain, but it can be helpful. I won't do that all the time. I'm just going to get that out here in front. It can also be helpful for dysmenorrhea or painful menses, but usually taken before the pain begins. So if you know your cycle and you're moving towards your PMS or your painful premenstrual syndrome, You can also try black cohosh there. So in most of these situations, black cohosh is taken regularly and to kind of, whatever it does to kind of help level hormones, to help with ovulation, to help with menstrual pain, to help reduce hot flashes. Um, and really could be used for other menstrual irregularities as well. So that's one part of black cohosh. And there's one more thing. So this is an interesting one. So this is a positive and a negative. So black cohosh can cause frontal lobe headaches. If you've ever had a headache and you're rubbing your forehead, that's a frontal lobe headache. The tricky thing about black cohosh, though, it can also help frontal lobe headaches. So you could just try that. So if you have a headache and it's not so much from your neck, it's not a migraine, but you feel it mostly towards the front of your head, you could try a couple of drops of black cohosh, and sometimes it helps. Whatever it's doing, it's just affecting some neurocircuitry in your forehead. But so in other words, it's another headache remedy. But also, if you take it for, let's say, hot flashes and you get a headache from it, just stop taking it. That headache will continue when you take it. It doesn't last for that long. That's black cohosh, Actaea racemosa, and probably also Actaea podocarpa, which used to be Actaea americana. The next herb is going to be horse chestnut. Is the speed okay? I'm trying to talk. Last time I feel like I talked a little bit faster. Yeah. All right. That's good for me. Wow. Somebody would like me to go faster. Don't even try me there. So horse chestnut is Aesculus hippocastanum. Horse chestnut is the seed of the plant, not the husk, but the seed of Aesculus hippocastanum, which actually means horse chestnut. Hippo means horse, chestnut means chestnut. Castanum means chestnut, as in Castanea, the genus of chestnuts. Horse chestnut is very closely related to buckeye, another Aesculus, but I've never used the buckeyes, and some people say they're poisonous. So I'm just saying that if you live around buckeye, you're from Ohio, for instance, the Buckeye state, I don't use those buckeyes, even though they are closely related. Horse chestnut is a European plant that's usually planted in the United States. I mean, usually, whenever you see horse chestnut, basically it's a planted plant. Horse chestnut is an excellent venous tonic. Venous in this case means vein. So it's something that helps with different irregularities of our veins as opposed to our arteries. So some of its uses are things like chronic venous insufficiency. Chronic, meaning constant, venous vein insufficiency, lack of blood flow in this case, is when blood starts to pool lower down in your leg. It's usually the legs, and doesn't come up as easily back to the heart to get redistributed. And so you start the lower part, wherever it happens, you'll get painful, itchy, and swelling with edema, get full of water, because the veins aren't adequately strong enough to get the blood back to the heart. But whenever you see this, whenever, like let's say you're noticing when you take your socks off that it leaves a big ring and your lower leg is very swollen, you do have to make sure that it's not heart congestion or what's called heart failure. So this is really an important distinction. So for instance, if your body is pooling blood at your lower extremities and you're holding water down there, get your heart checked out to make sure that your heart as a pump is functional enough to get that water back, get the blood, excuse me, back to the heart. That's called heart failure. It used to be called congestive heart failure. If that's not the case, and it's just that your veins aren't strong enough, then horse chestnut can be really helpful. It can also help prevent deep vein thrombosis. That's when the valves of the veins don't work enough, and so blood starts to pool again in the lower part of your leg. And the big problem with what's called deep vein thrombosis is that it can cause a stroke. What happens as the blood pools, the blood kind of recirculates and recirculates and can form a clot. That clot then can go up to the vein and to the heart, and then it can go to the lungs or it can go to the brain. So that's the problem with deep vein thrombosis. So if you have a minor case, you could try it. I mean, you have to make sure everything's working well if you have deep vein thrombosis. But if you have trouble with blood returning back, and again, your lower legs are edemic, then I would suggest taking horse chestnut. It's also helpful for hemorrhoids. This is going to be taken internally because often what a hemorrhoid is basically a swollen vein around one's butthole, right? Around one's anus. And so there's other herb to use externally if you have a hemorrhoid, especially if it's bleeding. But if you're prone to them, then horse chestnut is actually a good choice as well. And the last part of it, so basically horse chestnut is good for veins. The last part is can be helpful for varicose veins, which are also actually just the same thing. They're weaker veins. And so your body starts to form more veins in order to have more distribution of blood back up to the heart. So for varicose veins and chronic venous insufficiency, if the blood is pooling, and especially if you can see your veins, you can also use horse chestnut externally. So most of the time, horse chestnut is going to be used internally. But for some of the time, especially on lower limbs, you can use it also externally. My favorite form to use it externally is an liniment, which means it's an isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol. So while horse chestnut doesn't do a lot of different things, it does one thing very well, and it's pretty safe. I would suggest getting to know it because all these problems are common. All right. Next herb is mimosa, or I'm going to call it albizia, just so it doesn't get confused with other things called mimosa. So this is the plant called Albizia julibrissin, or mimosa. And it also has, it's used a lot in Chinese medicine, has a Chinese name that I don't know. Albizia, the plant I'm talking about, it's used internally. I mostly have used it in tincture form. And I would say it's one of the better plants for depression. I would put it higher for helping with depression than things like St. John's wort or lemon balm. It's usually taken as a tonic, really pretty much for most time when you have depression. It's different than anxiety in the sense of you can have like momentary anxiety and take something, but depression tends to be chronic and long lasting and kind of persistent. So for depression, taking albizia a few times a day, often you can mix it with things like tulsi or rose or St. John's wort or lemon balm to help. But really, I would make a big part of that formula to be the albizia. It's one of the ones I've seen work better. It's also helpful for anxiety. So albizia, like a couple of plants, like rose, for instance, or tulsi, all these plants tend to be helpful for both depression and anxiety. So, but it comes with one big caveat. You should not use albizia, mimosa, for anybody with bipolar disorder. It has been shown in a few people to put them in a manic state. So even if the person is bipolar and generally in a depressive state, even though bipolar talks about both states, I would just avoid the plant. So otherwise, it's really safe. It doesn't taste too bad. I use the bark rather than the flowers because I never see enough flowers and I can't get them too high, and the bark is pretty useful. And in parts of the country, albizia is pretty weedy. Not up here, but certainly in parts of Appalachia and Virginia, you can find them easily gathered. They're non-native trees. That's it for albizia. I'm going to finish one or two more, and then I'll look at some questions. The next one is ragweed. So this is a fun one because it's ironic one. So by ragweed, I mean ragweed. I mean a plant that's called ambrosia Artemisia folia. Ambrosia, weirdly enough, Ambrosia Artemisia folia. Um, so this is the ragweed that almost everybody is allergic to. Well, this is the ragweed that is the most common uh, allergy-causing plant. The pollen is kind of pointy and it's wind pollinated and it's just profuse. I mean, it grows from here to Florida. I'm in Ithaca, New York. It grows from here down to Florida. And for many people, it really is the bane. It starts to flower in August. And for a lot of people, it just makes a really horrible time for it. But here's the weird, ironic, paradoxical point. And that's that ragweed helps with allergies. I'm not somebody who believes that what hurts helps and what helps hurts or something like that. That's not a part of my belief systems. But in this case, here you go. So if you have allergies, even if your allergies are to ragweed, you can try ragweed for allergic symptoms. So I mean seasonal allergies. So I'm talking about runny nose, itchy eyes, sneezing, itchy back of the throat. I'm just talking about your common histamine-induced allergies. So I don't know, there might have been once or twice where I've seen ragweed tincture make somebody worse, but I've given it so many times that it's hard to tell if it's the ragweed or it's just some idiosyncratic reaction. I give ragweed very often for allergies. I would say that it's the second best antihistamine herb. I'm not going to cover the strongest antihistamine herb because it's just not for this topic, and has a number of side effects. But ragweed is safe unless, and even if you have the allergy. So I use the tincture of ragweed. If you're going to use the tincture of ragweed, gather it before it goes to pollen. I'm not really sure the pollen would cause a problem. It just makes the person feel more comfortable. So basically, in July, early August, I'll gather the plants, I'll strip the leaves off them, and I'll just make ragweed tincture. Again, I don't want to go into herbal preparations. Of course, if you're allergic to ragweed, you should definitely before it goes to flower. Otherwise, you'll just have very strong allergic reactions while gathering the plant. So the one problem with it besides that is I've noticed that many people develop tolerance to ragweed pretty quickly, the tincture. And so it works great for like 2 or 3 months, and then it just stops working. The next herb to try if it stops working would be Eyebright or Euphrasia. So I'm just making some suggestions, but I'm saying that ragweed is one of the better antihistamines, despite the fact that the pollen causes lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of seasonal allergies. All right, I'm going to look at a few questions here and see if thank you, Rebecca. I was proud of my mom as well. So Michael talks about the beta acerone in Calamus. I'm not going to get into that, Michael. You just have to look it up. The amounts that people use regularly, the beta acerone found in Acorus calamus, doesn't seem to be a problem, but it's a very tricky thing. But if you're interested, anybody's interested, you can look Calamus and beta acerone. Try to find multiple sources to get some good responses on how to use it clinically. Judy asked about calamus and cattail. So you're right. So cattail is typha, and calamus is called sweet flag. So there's blue flag, that's an iris, and then there's sweet flag, and that's calamus. Amanda asks about, this probably is about horse chestnut. Is horse chestnut safe for pregnant people with edema? I don't know, Amanda. I'm not sure. I haven't looked up. In general, horse chestnut has a very excellent safety record, and there's been a number of clinical studies on it, but I've never read anything about its use in pregnancy. So I'm not really sure. That's a great question. And I think that's it. All right. How y'all doing? Half hour in, having a okay day. You can all show off your cats if you like. Another thing that I miss. So the next plant is barberry or Oregon grapefruit. I'm going to cover them together. So barberry, like Japanese barberry, or Oregon grapefruit. And if you live in Texas, you might be calling it agarita or algarita. Um, all these plants are very closely related. And the constituent that's important in these plants is the constituent called berberine. So the genus of these plants is Berberis. Some of them used to be Mahonia. And the constituent in them is called berberine. Excuse me. So different parts of the plants are used, but you know it has a lot of berberine if it's yellow. Yeah, berberine is a yellow alkaloid found in a bunch of plants. Not everything yellow, though. For instance, the yellow in yellow dock is not berberine whatsoever. So Oregon grapefruit is one of my favorite first aid plants and one of my favorite diet plants for blood sugar control. So it's really helpful here. So I'm going to cover it for a little bit. But before I go any further, avoid Berberis in pregnancy. So avoid any plant in Berberis, any Oregon grapefruits or any barberries during pregnancy. There's a chance of it causing contractions. So avoid them. So first, I use Berberis species, whatever one I get, Japanese barberry or Oregon grapefruits, for diabetes. So generally the people I'm working with are already on medicines. So they're already on metformin or other blood sugar controlling agents. But they still have elevated sugar in their blood. They have elevated A1Cs. And so it seems to work well with the medications. So Oregon grapefruit or Berberis are what are called blood sugar sensitizers. Or insulin, better yet, let me change that. They're called insulin sensitizers. So they're helpful. They're not helpful for type 1 diabetes, where you're not making insulin. They're only helpful for type 2 diabetes, where you are still making insulin, but your cells are resistant to the insulin because it doesn't make insulin. So there's lots to know about diabetes, and it's an important thing to study. So if people's levels, even if they're high and they're on medication, I'm still going to give some Berberis and see if I can get it down a couple of notches. But you can also try it. So first I'm saying you can use it with medications, but I'm also saying, like, if you're just creeping up and you're watching your diet and doing the other things important for blood sugar control, and your A1C is now like 6.5, 6.8. I don't want to go over all the numbers. It's basically, it's creeping up above 6, you're moving towards 7. You can initially just try Berberis to see if that will help bring it under control while monitoring your blood sugar. Because once you reach a certain level, damage happens in the body. Diabetes is very problematic in the body because sugar in the blood causes inflammation all over the place. So you can use Berberis as a plant as well as monitoring to see if you can get that sugar out of your blood, into your bloodstream, out of your bloodstream and into your cells, and lower your blood glucose levels. So I'm a big fan of it for that. I generally, though, I use it together with cinnamon, which I'll cover later. They're a great combination. Berberis species and cinnamon for blood sugar control. Remember, though, medications might be very important here and doing other things to help with blood sugar control. If you do it, you have to take it every day. And there's no not taking it, right? Once you reach a certain level, you're probably going to be on You're probably going to need medicines. That's not everybody, but many people will need to be on medicines for a long time, if not forever, to just make sure that their blood sugar stays in control. But Berberis, most people these days are just using Berberine, which you can buy. So Berberine is the alkaloid and it's extracted and sold, but I just use the tincture or the glycerite. If somebody can't take alcohol, and there's many reasons people can't take alcohol, I'll put it in glycerin. Just a word on that is that glycerin it does not elevate blood sugar levels. So even though glycerin is very sweet, generally from soy or palm oil, palm kernels, the way that it's processed does not elevate blood sugar fast. So glycerins are safe in diabetes, is the point of that. The next use of Oregon grapefruit and barberry is that it's just great at killing a wide variety of infections internally and externally. So I use it as an antibacterial, so something like staph infections. I use it as an antiviral for cold and flu infections. I've used it as an antiprotozoal for people who have giardia. So it's not going to help everybody all the time, but I think that berberine found in these plants has some of the best uses for a number of types of pathogens. And I'll name the pathogens again: bacterial pathogens, viral pathogens, and protozoal pathogens. So you can use it externally in the form of a liniment or an oil liniment or tincture, or you can take it internally. Again, avoid it during pregnancy. And so you have to usually use large amounts of it. So if I'm working in a first aid station, and all of a sudden we start getting a lot of people with E. coli, right? And so we have a lot of people vomiting and diarrhea coming in. You can't give it to them while they're vomiting, of course, because they'll just vomit it out. It's strong flavored. But after they stop vomiting, then you can start giving it. And generally, it's like 2 mils with other herbs, 1 full dropper full every 3 to 4 hours during the height of an infection. Externally, you can just keep applying it on. So it's one of the herbs that I use for staph infections. If you're applying herbs for staph infections, you would want to mix it, though, also with the plant called chaparral, Laurea tridentata. We see a lot of staph, or used to. I've stopped doing so much first aid. So Oregon grapefruit is just a good internal herb, except for pregnancy, for a wide variety of infections, including bacterial and viral and protozoal. I've never used it for leishmanias, which is, or leishmaniasis, which comes from sand fleas. More, you find that way south of here. I've never tried it. I think you need drugs for that. That's just a very strong protozoal infection. But giardia, you can give it a try for. I will say, though, right now, the majority of people that I've met who say they have giardia did not. They had other infections that they thought were giardia because they drank water, live water. One last thing about the plants, the Berberis species plants, is that they often seem to increase the efficiency of some antibiotics. So if somebody has Lyme and they're taking antibiotics, sometimes you can give Oregon grapefruit or barberry to try to increase the efficiency. Sometimes the antibiotics do it on their own. Once the infection is in the body and has spread, then it gets much trickier. So that's another thing about it, though. There's been just a few studies on it. All right. So the next herb has a couple of common names. It's either called betony or wood betony. Just depends what you read. Betony or wood betony. And that plant has a couple of scientific names as well. Sometimes it's called Stakes, some species like Stakes officinalis. But it could also be, its current name is Botanica officinalis. But I'm just saying, when you look it up, often you'll see it be called Stakes rather than Botanica. The name keeps changing. Science changes. It's one of the problematic, but also very important aspects of science. If science didn't change, it would not be science. We would be stuck. So betony or wood betony, Botanica officinalis, Stakes officinalis, Stakes botanica, etc. It's one of my favorite herbs for anxiety. Um, it's usually better to take it as a tonic rather than just taking it for acute anxiety, though it can be tried for that as well. So it's good for agitation, for just general nervousness. It can be helpful for sleep, but if it's taken regularly, so it's not a great sleep herb, it's not a sedative. So if you take it just before you go to sleep, it doesn't have that kind of quick action. But if you have difficulty sleeping because maybe your mind is agitated or anxiety exists, I mean, I'm not sure why anybody would anxious in this world where everything seems to be going perfectly everywhere, but maybe if something little thing is going wrong somewhere. That was sarcastic. So if you're just generally having a hard time sleeping because your mind is overthinking things, you can try the wood betony. But again, take it throughout the day, like 2 to 3 times a day, not just before going to sleep. Um, it's also a headache herb. So for stress headaches, it can be helpful. So if you're just, if you're driving a long distance and you get a headache, or you're listening to me talk for too long and you get a headache, um, you could try. It's a pretty safe herb. I don't really know any contraindications for it, any reasons not to try it. I often combine it with other plants like Damiana, uh, Tulsi, rose, uh, linden flower. It combines well with a lot of things. The next herb is Gotu kola, which does not have kola nuts in it, which would mean because kola nuts have caffeine, which this doesn't. Gotu kola is Centella asiatica. Centella asiatica. And there's some disputes about that currently. And it has two main functions that I use it regularly for. First, it seems very safe. I haven't seen really any complications from its use, or really read many complications from its use. So it could be used for a wide variety of people. Its first use is for mental health. As I mentioned with Calamus, I said you can mix Gotu kola with Calamus. But Gotu kola can be helpful again for memory and focus, particularly after accident or injury, but it doesn't work fast. So Calamus you can take, like I need to stay focused here. Centella or Gotu kola doesn't work as well. So Gotu kola is generally taken as a tonic. It can be just taken over time as memory and focus diminish with age. It can be taken on a regular basis. And it just seems really, yeah, it's it has a lot of press. There's a lot of information about it. I haven't found it dramatically useful, but I find it useful to be taken regularly to help restore cognitive function. Cognitive function really means brain fog, right? So if something's disrupted your body, and now it's just hard for you, things seem fuzzy in your head. The word brain fog is a pretty good metaphor. Uh, Gotu kola is a good herb for that. But again, taken on a regular basis rather than just taken as needed. So it'd be some herb to consider after TBI, a traumatic brain injury, along with getting other care that's necessary um, for that. So the next the next herb to consider, the next aspect of Gotu kola is its use as a vulnerary or a wound healing. So I like Gotu kola after an injury, like after a sprained knee or a strained wrist or a strained ankle, basically a joint that you've pulled or damaged for a while and you're trying to repair it. There are not that many. Here's what I'm trying to say. There are many connective tissue problems, especially the connective tissue that hold like body parts together, like joints and bones together. And like, so your knee goes out. There are not that many herbs that help kind of that tissue reform in a way that gives you elasticity, but also enough rigor so it stays, so it doesn't go out again. But centella or Gotu kola is one of the herbs taken on a regular basis and sometimes used externally as well that can be helpful for that kind of connective tissue disorder. Um, it's also another herb that's helpful for venous insufficiency. We've talked about that with horse chestnut. So if you have fragile veins, your veins break easy, you have black and blue easily, or your skin gets discolored after getting hit even lightly because your capillaries are breaking, Gotu kola, along with horse chestnut, are herbs to consider as well. Um, so we have Gotu kola for both helping with long-term memory and focus and brain fog. We also have Gotu kola to help with injury repair to the body, taken tonically over the course of time. And those are its uses. And again, it seems really safe to use. And if you live in Florida or Hawaii, some other places, it grows wild. Look in your lawns, you might find it. It likes sandier areas. All right. The next herb is cinnamon. Um, there's cinnamon gets really complex. There's a bunch of species of cinnamon. Many of them are used differently depending if you're a cinnabon person or if you go to a French bakery and they use different cinnamons. Um, but most of the cinnamons work similarly. So the genus of cinnamon is Cinnamomum. There's actually 250 species of Cinnamomum, of, but most of them are not as aromatic as the cinnamons that we use as spices in culinary. So a few things about cinnamon. Excuse me. It can be helpful for what's called metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is a complication that includes high blood pressure, adipose tissue gain, weight gain, insulin resistance, and what's called dyslipidemia or poor cholesterol. I'll say that all again. So cinnamon is useful for metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a collection of disorders, that's why it's a syndrome, that includes insulin resistance, uh, blood sugar problems, cholesterol problems, high blood pressure. And it looks like cinnamon can be regulatory in a number of these factors. How it works, there's some interesting science on it if you're looking to see exactly how it works, but it's an herb that I would certainly suggest for anybody. Metabolic syndrome used to be called Syndrome X. Pretty much it's just called metabolic syndrome these days. Cinnamon in general can be used as a cholesterol aid. So if you have high LDLs, maybe high triglycerides, and low HDLs, then cinnamon might be a good choice to use. And again, it can also just be used for type 2 diabetes where there's still insulin being made. So it's a pretty useful herb. Initially, when I tell people about cinnamon, they get pretty excited because of its flavor. But I'll tell you that after like 5 or 6 cinnamon smoothies, you get pretty sick of it. So you might want to consider putting it in tincture or glycerite or capsules to get the right amount. But you could put it in smoothies. It's safe that way. The next herb is hawthorn. I use hawthorn flowers more than I use hawthorn fruit, but both are useful. I think the flowers are a little more helpful for the things I'm describing. And hawthorn here in the Northeast is now flowering. It'll flower for the next week or so, and then it will finish flowering. And then come fall, you can pick the fruits. So hawthorn has a few general medicinal aspects to it. It's mostly used as a cardiac aid, but I also want to say that's an anxiolytic. Hawthorn is an herb to help quell anxiety, taken regularly. In European medicine, like current European medicine, mostly where I spend time, well, people I visited in England and the UK, it's one of the main herbs used for anxiety and just taken as a regular nervine tonic. When I say nervine, I mean a plant that you take over the course of time that helps your nervous system work better, um, rather than something that you take as needed. So hawthorn as a nervine or a nervous system tonic for anxiety. It's considered very safe It's very rich in antioxidants, as most plants are, most foods are. Well, most vegetable foods are high in antioxidants. So if you've tried a bunch of stuff for anxiety and want, or especially, if you're sensitive, and so you're somebody that a lot of the anxiety herbs are too much for you and sedate you, hawthorn is pretty nice, just like tulsi or rose, where it tends to not be sedative at all for most people. It's also hawthorn is also a cardiac aid. So many people use it. This is come with a caveat. Many people use it to lower blood pressure, but it's not great for lowering blood pressure unless your blood pressure is just a little bit elevated. You're 135, you're 140, you're 145 over 75, well, not 75, like 85, 90, 95. The reason I'm saying this is that high blood pressure over the course of time will cause damage. So if you have really high blood pressure, I don't know, if you're 160 over 100, hawthorn is not going to bring your blood pressure down. But what it will do is it will make your heart a better functioning organ and help it reduce free radical oxidation. It will help reduce the damage done to the heart by high blood pressure and other cardiac diseases. So really what hawthorn is cardioprotective. It helps the myocardial cells. The myocardial cells are the cells that actually pump in the heart, right? You have two specialized kind of cells in the heart. Some of them carry electrical signals, and the majority of them are basically muscle cells that start, whatever age we are, and they start pumping, and then they pump, pump, pump until they stop. So it's kind of amazing to think about the heart muscle. So hawthorn's really not bad for anybody, honestly. It's high in antioxidants, so it's just generally good as a free radical scavenger. But I would say if you've had heart disease or if you have high blood pressure, and you're doing other things for those problems, I would suggest also taking hawthorn on a regular basis, just to help keep the heart in good shape. Or if maybe genetically your family is disposed to heart disease, hawthorn can be taken. You probably want to take it at least twice a day. And I would suggest, I like mixing the fruits and the flowers. The fruits taste better. And so, I'll make a tincture that's half fruit and half flower, but the flower is probably a little bit stronger as far as its cardiac antioxidant activity. So hawthorn has two really useful aspects to it. It's good as a cardioprotective herb and for mild hypertension, and it's a good nervine, something nice for the nervous system. The next herb we're going to talk about is Yerba Santa. If you happen to live in Los Angeles, raise your hand if you live in LA. It'll grow around you. I'm just seeing one LA person in here. So Yerba Santa is the genus Aerodictian. A little bit tricky to spell. Aerodictian. There's a number of species. And it has two helpful things. So this is Yerba Santa. Some people say Yerba Santa, Aerodictian species. And there are three useful things to it. I feel like I'm doing the Spanish Inquisition sketch. The first is it's a good decongestant and pretty safe. It's usually taken as a tincture internally, but you can also use it in a neti pot. Most of my patients don't really like neti pots, so I don't really use them very often. While squirting anything up their nose. But you could just take it internally. So Yerba Santa Aerodictian is a decongestant, and it's also expectorant, which is common for a couple of plants. Expectorants help bring extra phlegm out of your lungs, out of your respiratory tract. So if you're really phlegmy and you're bringing a lot of phlegm up, you can use Yerba Santa to bring more phlegm up. I mean, initially you get more phlegmy as phlegm comes out of your nose and phlegm comes out of your mouth. So Yerba Santa is a good expectorant and a good decongestant. We have used and continue to use a lot of it for COVID-19 and other flus. which is what COVID-19 is now moving into, that phase where it's another kind of flu. Not doesn't mean you shouldn't protect yourself, but a little less horrific than 4 or 5 years ago. A lot less horrific then, but still can cause major disruption in the body. I guess what I'm saying is I use a lot of Aerodictian um, for flus and colds. Colds are just you get over quicker. Flus are more problematic. And the last part of this is that Yerba Santa can be helpful for what is called roost dermatitis, or you would call poison ivy or poison oak rash. So if you're somebody who's allergic to poison ivy or poison oak, and if it's not too spread out, you can use the liniment, which means it's an isopropyl alcohol of Yerba Santa, or you can use the tincture of it. You don't want to use an oil. And just put it on your poison ivy or poison oak rash. And sometimes it helps really well. Sometimes it doesn't help at all. Sometimes it helps a little. So we have Yerba Santa being a decongestant, an expectorant, and a poison ivy, poison oak remedy. The next herb is Eyebright. That's weird. I'm having a song from my childhood from a TV show. Oh gosh, I forget what it was. Like one of those Saturday shows. I'll stop right there. Oh, it's starting to infect. So Eyebright is the genus Euphrasia, which means to be good mind, have a good mind. And then there's a lot of species. I use the non-native Eyebrights. So in the Adirondacks of New York, Eyebright is starting to spread. It's also in Maine. The non-native Eyebright can be pretty spready aroundy, meaning just weedy. And so while the reason I'm saying this is there are some places where some species of Eyebright need to be protected, but there are other places where Eyebright is currently spreading at a pretty good rate. And so that's where I gather it from. So if you live near the Adirondacks, you probably live near Eyebright or in Maine. And Eyebright is very safe. I don't think I've ever seen a negative reaction. And it's one of my favorite, after ragweed, it's my second favorite antihistamine herb. I use Eyebright for allergy symptoms, runny nose, itchy eyes, itchy ears, sneezing. So Eyebright can be helpful. Just like ragweed, it seems like people build up tolerance to it after a few weeks. And so I try to have people switch between ragweed and Eyebright. And then if there's other herbs that you use, you can use these also in conjunction with your medications, for your allergy medications. Then Eyebright also tends to help around the eye. So it's used for conjunctivitis, which is an infection of the cornea, the part of your eye that kind of covers the whole eye. It's like a film, it's a lens that covers your eyeball. So the eye proper is protected. It can also be used for what's called blepharitis, which is an infection or really an inflammation of the eyelid. Sometimes it's due to stuck oil glands. So Eyebright can be used for the eyes. It could be used for painful swollen eyes. It could be used in conjunctivitis. It could be used for blepharitis. Blepharitis, again, is eyelid. And you can use these internally and externally in an eye cup. So you can get Eyebright maybe as a tea or a very, very dilute tincture, and then just put an eye cup or a compress and put it against the eye. But if you have conjunctivitis, you likely have an either viral or bacterial infection, then you might also want to add herbs that kill infections. Then you can take those internally. So Eyebright is really useful, very safe. It's used for allergies and what you would say is ocular disorders or problems of the eye, but it's not used for things like macular degeneration. They're not used for it's not used for nerve damage to the eye. It's really used for things that just affect the outer rim of the eye, things that it's coming into contact with. So that's Eyebright, pretty helpful. I'll see if I'm going to take a quick look at questions. I don't know why I say quick. I'm going to take a look at questions. So Amanda asked what part of the Berberis plant is used. Um, generally the roots are used of Berberis plants is the answer to that. Um, that's kind of a complicated question, Owen. Well, I didn't skip Eyebright yet. Let me see. Sorry, I'm preparing to make some RMD. Again, oh, well, I just covered. I think I just covered it. Sorry. Michael asked about why does ragweed seem to hold up for some and not others? That's just the big question. Why are some people herbs really help them for and others not? I don't have a good answer to that, unfortunately. Um, yeah, and Amanda's mentioning that Gotu kola is used a lot in skincare. A lot of the herbs I talk about will be used in skincare. I'm just not that good with it, skincare. Amanda asks if hawthorn is similar to motherwort. I would say they're not similar. I don't have motherwort listed as a plant I'll cover today, but I think as anxiolytics they have pretty different actions. Christina asks if Gotu kola is safe while breastfeeding. And I would say that I think that Gotu kola probably would be safe while breastfeeding. I've never seen any contraindications, and I've looked it up a bunch, but I would do a little more research, of course. And hello to Eagle Song, though not here, and Jude and Carl. Carissa asks, what percentage of iso isopropyl alcohol? Is that what ISO stands for there? I would do about 1 to 2, Carissa. Um, Michael mentions that Eyebright is often adulterated with other herbs. I guess that could be true. I pick it, so I'm sure it's the right herb. Vanessa asks, can you use cinnamon and hawthorn at the same time? Yes, to that one. So Carissa, yeah, again, 1 to 2 is a pretty good if you're 1 to 2 making the isopropyl. Christine asks, am I using the leaves of betony? Uh, so I pretty much use the whole above ground part, Christine. I'm going to use the leaves, the flowering stalk, and the flowers if it's in flower. It's just starting to go to flower now. Yeah. Ceylon cinnamon is used a lot in the United States, but other cinnamons are used elsewhere. That's a question about what cinnamons. All right. I'm going to go back to this. So take a breath, take a drink. It's finally not raining up here, which means it's time to mow the lawn. So, and which takes about 5 hours. It's a lot of lawn here. And that's only a small portion. So the next herb is silk tassel. People often get confused and think I'm either saying like corn silk or something tassel, but these are two words making up one plant, silk and tassel. The genus of silk tassel is Garrya, Garrya, just like, almost like Michael Jackson's hometown. So Garrya is the genus of these plants. And this is a plant that I don't find is used as often, but it's a really helpful plant. So Garrya is basically, or silk tassel is basically an antispasmodic. Antispasmodics are plants used for cramps. So Garrya could be used, so silk tassel could be used for menstrual cramps. And I would say it's one of the stronger herbs for menstrual cramps, especially combined with Jamaican dogwood, which I think I'll get to. So Garrya or silk tassel um, is good for menstrual cramps. It's also really good when you're passing a stone to help reduce the pain while passing a stone, whether it's a kidney stone or a gallbladder stone. It's still going to hurt. You still need other herbs like diuretics to help move it, especially if that's a kidney stone. But Gary is one of the better plants. Gary silk tassel, one of the better plants for helping move stones out of the body. I'm sorry, I'll say that again differently. Silk tassel is helpful for reducing the pain while passing stones. You could also use it for digestive cramps. There are some herbs that I consider better for digestive cramps, like wild yam, Dioscorea villosa. I find better for digestive cramps, but but silk tassel can still be used. But I really find silk tassel best used for cramping for menstrual cramps and passing stones cramps. Um, it seems pretty safe. It's a little bit hard to find very specific information on silk tassel, but I've been giving it for years to people, and I haven't seen any negative effects yet. The next herb is devil's claw. The claw. That's my Long Island accent coming out of me. I'm going to the mall to get some devil's claw, Mom. I don't know why the mom thing. That's not how mom would be said at all. Oh, no, I'm losing my Long Island accent after 48 years. Anyway, back to the subject. I'm talking about devil's claw, not devil's club, not devil's ding dong, not devil food cakes, just devil's claw. And the genus of devil's claw is Harpagophytum. Harpagophytum. There's two species that are commonly used, but they're both in the genus Harpagophytum. And devil's claw is one of my favorite herbs. These are all my favorite herbs. I mean, I have a list of favorite herbs here. Is one of my favorite herbs as an anti-inflammatory for joint pain. So I use it for a variety of arthritic pains, including osteoarthritis, though it doesn't lubricate. Now, when you have bone on bone, anti-inflammatories will reduce pain, but they don't build up the synovial fluid or the connective tissue in there, but they will reduce some of the pain of osteoarthritis. It's sometimes helpful for rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition. And I would just say, in my mind, it's good for gardener's hands. Like you just use your body a lot and your fingers get stiff or whatever part of your body you use regularly just gets stiff. I would suggest devil's claw. Most of the research on it looks like it's very safe. The biggest problem with it, it's grown in parts of deserts in a desert in Africa where it might be being over harvested. And so people are just starting to cultivate it, which will take pressure off the wild species. Desert plants can be easily over harvested. It seems like they can't, but they're in a very tenuous environment. Anyway, so devil's claw, Harpagophytum species, is really used for inflamed joints. You take it regularly. It's not used as needed. You take it with other herbs like yucca, and Japanese knotweed, for these kind of inflamed joint conditions. It's one of the herbs I use the most for Lyme disease arthritis, or really any infectious disease arthritis. So, but a lot of the people, I live up in the Northeast. Lyme, unfortunately, is common up here, as it is in many places. But often after people have Lyme, even during Lyme or post-Lyme, the joints are very stiff. And Harpagophytum or devil's claw is one of the herbs I like to use regularly. And it should be taken as a tonic, though, on a regular basis. The next herb is hops. Hops is Cumulus lupulus. It's a plant called hops, and it's the strobiles. It is related to cannabis. They're in the same family. It's interesting because, like cannabis, hops, you basically use the fruit of the female plant, the strobile in the case of hops, and it has a resin that's a little bit psychoactive. So hops and cannabis share a lot. They also have opposite dissected leaves. They're interesting plants. So anyway, hops has a couple of really useful uses. You can make it, it's very strong tasting. You can make a glyceride out of it, or you can make a tincture out of it. The tea, though, for many people will just be over the top. I want to point out that beer even hopsy beers, um, the effects you have is not from hops, it's from the alcohol. So if you take hops, you won't have the same effect as if you drink a hops full beer, a hopsy beer. So uses for hops, it's a pain reliever is the main one. And we're moving towards a sedative herb here now. So many of the herbs I've talked about can be used for reducing anxiety. They're usually not very sedative. Hops, on the other hand, can be sedative, dose dependent, or depending how sensitive the individual is, right? So this is always a question I ask, and it's important to ask or ask yourself. Many people are sensitive to things that they ingest. So, I mean, they might have something like multiple chemical sensitivity, MCS, but you're not really looking for that. You're just saying, are you sensitive in general to things that you might ingest? And sensitive people will say yes. I mean, if that's going to be something that's lifelong for you, that you know that you just can't eat or take the same amounts of medicines that other people can. That's a whole topic on itself. What I'm saying, though, is for some people, if people are more sensitive to herbs, hops can be too strong for them to take, at least during the day. So hops is a pain reliever, what's called an anodyne, and it's a sedative pain reliever. That means you reduces the sensation of pain by making you care about it less, rather than stopping the nerves from firing that are causing the pain signaling. It's one of the better plants for helping with sleep. So hops is a good sleep aid. And you can take, of course, really large amounts to help with sleep. You could take it right before going to sleep. And you can also take it if you wake up during the night and can't fall back to sleep. So in that case, you want to just take really large amounts and prepare it beforehand. So if you're somebody who wakes up at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning and can't fall back to sleep, take as much hops as you need, a dropper full, 2 dropperfuls, put it in some water. And as soon as you wake up at, let's say 3, take it before your mind goes on fire, take some of the hops and see if you can kind of quell the thoughts and quell your body to fall back to sleep. Hops is also an anxiolytic. It can also help with anxiety, taken at smaller, regular doses throughout the day. So let's say you just have a lot of awkwardness and social interaction, a lot of anxiety, social anxiety. One thing to consider would be taking very small amounts of hops, maybe with other herbs like damiana or wood betony, to kind of keep the anxiety levels lower. So in this case, though, you're going to be taking small amounts with other herbs on a regular basis. And something I just learned that I think is pretty commonly known is the stems of hops taste pretty good when they're young. I was surprised. I was just told this, and I thought, I'm not just gonna, because the leaves are very bitter, but actually the stem is pretty tasty. I'm not going to eat too many because I want to grow hops, but that's something to know about hop stems. All right, we got a few more herbs to cover. The next herb is Elecampane. To give people a sense, I'll stop around 3:30. I'll cover it. It's about 2:45 right now, about 45 more minutes. So the next herb is Elecampane. Elecampane is just one of the primary herbs to use for respiratory inflammation, which of course is a very common effect from COVID-19 and from other flus. So Elecampane, which is Inula helenium elecampane, it's the root of the plant, is a really helpful plant for respiratory inflammation. It seems pretty safe. It's kind of strong. I'm sure there are some. I'm not really sure who I wouldn't give it to at this point because I haven't seen side effects. But of course, this is an herb that was primary throughout COVID-19 and during cold and flu seasons. Well, really flu seasons. Colds are mostly up here. Flus tend to get down there. So I suggest getting to know it. So it's helpful for viral recovery, for respiratory viruses, if you're having trouble breathing. So it has to be, so it's not going to help the bronchi that constrict that you get during asthma. It's not an anti-asthma herb. It reduces inflammation in the lungs. So it's not going to be used like for where you might use albuterol. It's going to be used where you're using a steroid, though it's not a steroid and it's not as strong as a steroid. but when you're trying to reduce respiratory or lung inflammation and pleural inflammation, the lining that holds the lungs against the chest wall and against your ribs. So if you have trouble breathing, and also you've been checked out to make sure it's not serious, something that you can do at home, especially after a flu, Elecampane might be one of the herbs to really consider taking on a regular basis. It's also an expectorant, so it can help bring phlegm out of the chest, out of the lungs. And it is one of the herbs I use for COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, with, of course, having the people do all the other things that are necessary because COPD is progressive. But a few people I've worked with, it looks like the Elecampane plus other herbs have slowed the progression of the COPD. So that's making a big claim, but looks like a couple of people have better luck taking this. And again, it's just a slower progression of COPD. But of course, you also want to be seeing your pulmonologist and getting all the tests necessary. So all this to say that Elecampane is one of your primary respiratory tonics. It's something you're going to take if you have a cold or flu, and you're having inflammation in the lungs and it's more difficult to breathe from down in here. Elecampane could be really helpful. It combines really well with pleurisy root. So pleurisy root is Asclepias tuberosa. And often when I'm giving Elecampane, I'm giving it alongside with pleurisy root, Asclepias tuberosa. The one thing is, though, Elecampane is weedy where I live, here in upstate New York, and pleurisy root barely exists up here, and it's very expensive to purchase. So I tend to lean heavily into the Elecampane. The next herb has a lot to discuss with it. See how quick I can do it. And it's called Lobelia, or Lobelia inflata is its scientific name, Lobelia. Lobelia inflata. It has some names like pukeweed. I'm not going to call it pukeweed. Hardly ever makes people puke. And Lobelia has some really primary uses. At this point in my herbal career, I think that Lobelia has some of the most interesting medicinal, physiological actions of almost any plant that I use. So I'm about to discuss some of them. So Lobelia, Lobelia is called pukeweed because it's supposed to make people vomit. It rarely does that. I don't drink the tea that can make you vomit. I have met one or two people that say the tincture has made them vomit. I've given gallons of the stuff over the course of 30 years, and occasionally it makes a little bit of nausea, but that's not even very common. So there's a lot of worry about Lobelia causing nausea, causing vomiting. I find it uncommon. If you're nervous, just try a small amount at a time. The reason I'm saying this is because I use a lot of Lobelia, and I'm about to describe it. So the first thing about Lobelia is something called, I would call it an adjuvant. All this means that it increases the efficiency of other herbs that you're taking. So in other words, if I'm taking herbs for, let's say, the nervous system, if I'm taking herbs for anxiety, I'm taking, let's say, Damiana, or small amounts of hops, or betony, or passion flower. If you add a small amount of Lobelia into the formula, you find that it has a stronger effect. The reason to say this is that Lobelia works on the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest and relax part of the nervous system. And I find this to be true. I don't use it as a primary. So if people are anxious, I don't give Lobelia by itself. But if I find that people are resistant, so they're anxious, and I give them different anti-anxiety herbs, and it helps a little bit, and I feel like I just want another herb to kick it in and help it work a little bit better. And I don't think it works by getting the herbs more into the body, I think it works I think it works via the parasympathetic nervous system, and somehow within that, helping the other herbs work and having a better anti-anxiety reaction with lobelia in the formula. So I'll try to say that differently. If you're working with people and who are anxious a lot and you're giving herbs and they don't seem to be helping, but you want to try to add another herb, add a small amount of lobelia into the formula and see if you get a better action from it. So occasionally people, especially if they eat the fresh plant, they get spacey from it. So if you're walking around and you see some plants and you're like, I can't see anything in those clouds, and you think I used to be able to see ducks and horses or whatever, try eating a piece of lobelia and look at the clouds again and see if they turn into some animals or whatever you would like clouds to represent. Lobelia is also an antispasmodic, so it's good for cramping. It's not a primary, again, it's usually used alongside other herbs. So if you're giving a formula for menstrual cramps and using something like silk tassel, Jamaican dogwood, add a small amount of lobelia into that formula as well. And again, if somebody's passing a stone and you're doing things like silk tassel, add some lobelia into that because it stops the cramping action, but it still helps with passing the stone. But you need diuretics, like you need fluid to flush those stones out if they're kidney stones. One more thing about lobelia is that I find it as a good trauma aid. I find it grounding. So like I talked about with Calamus, somebody got bit by something, somebody got into a fight, somebody got into something that's raised kind of a trauma effect in them. You could try small amounts of lobelia just by itself. It has a grounding effect to it. But in this case, just a couple of drops. Then we have the major use, all of this because lobelia does so many things. Then we have one of its most major uses where it becomes a gateway herb because it helps so clearly. And that is it's a bronchodilator. So just moments ago, I said that Elecampane will help with inflammation of the lungs. That's where it does help. This, where lobelia works, is when you have bronchoconstriction. Basically, you have asthma, and there are three parts to asthma. There's inflammation, constriction, and mucus. And what the lobelia do is it will help with the constriction. In other words, lobelia has similar properties to albuterol. So don't get rid of your albuterol inhalers, but you can try it alongside of it. So the reason I'm saying this is that when you give herbs, except for things like cannabis, I mean, there's some herbs that are obviously have an effect. A plant I don't use. But when you're giving herbs, often it's subtle. And so you're giving herbs to people and they're like, I think it helped. When you give lobelia to somebody who's having bronchoconstriction due to asthma, often within a minute or two, it helps. And so for people doing that, they're like, oh my gosh, herbs really work, as if humans have not been using them for 10,000 years or whatever. But I would carry it. So if you have somebody who's asthmatic or working with somebody who has asthma, you can try it, and actually you can stagger it with the albuterol. So let's say they do a puff of albuterol and it helps. They could do like about 10 drops of lobelia and see if that helps a little bit too. If they want to use less, I mean, albuterol is not the worst of drugs, so there's no reason not to use it. But many of us just like using herbs alongside or by themselves. So lobelia is a bronchodilator that can help with different, like exertion asthma, really whatever the cause of asthma is, but it is not an anti-inflammatory. So if you're using a steroid, if you're using a steroid medication for your asthma, this does not replace it in any way at all, like Pulmicort, right? Because those things are reducing inflammation. Lobelia is a bronchodilator. That's it. And it's a gateway herb. What do we got here? The next herb I want to talk about is peony. These are the roots of peony plants. I don't really know if the peonies that people grow that are just starting to come up in my garden, I've never used those. I have used the native peonies that grow in the southwest of the United States. That's the primary peony I use. There are wild peonies in the US. But also it's commonly sold as a Chinese medicine, peony roots. There's a red one and a white one. Um, but peony roots I use regularly for some similar actions as I use black cohosh. So peony is a gynecological herb. So I use it for both amenorrhea, uh, so a lack of menses, dysmenorrhea, taken as a tonic for painful menses, for irregular menstrual cycles, and for PCOS. PCOS, all these are complicated, frankly. PCOS, again, is often elevated testosterone. Often there's blood sugar problems. Those have to be worked at as well for PCOS. But it can be helpful to regulate some of the hormone, some of the estrogen aspects of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which often doesn't have cysts. So peony is almost always taken as a tonic. It seems very safe. Basically, it's going to be taken once or twice a day throughout the cycle. And whenever you're trying to regulate menstrual cycles, one thing that's important to realize is that it's not going to make any change for 2 to 3 months, right? Because if you have it takes a while for cycles to hook back up. That's weird. It takes a while for cycles to get regular again. And so if you're giving herbs like peony root, and the person asks how long they need to take it, unfortunately, like 2 to 3 months at least, to see if it'll make any difference in their menstrual cycle, whether it's amenorrhea or dysmenorrhea, or irregular menstrual cycles. I usually combine it with wild yam, and those two work well together. Wild yam is Dioscorea villosa. So that's a peony root as a gynecological aid. And again, it's pretty easy to purchase. It's in lots of formulas online. The next herb is Jamaican dogwood. Jamaican dogwood is Pisidia piscicola, as in Pisces, as in fish. Pisidia piscicola, it means kind of fish poison, Pisidia piscicola. And Jamaican dogwood is just a really useful non-sedative pain reliever. So that's one aspect for it. So it can be, often it's mixed in to increase the efficiency of other pain relieving herbs. So let's say somebody has bad menstrual cramps and you give them some things like silk tassel. You also want to often add in Jamaican dogwood. Somebody's passing a stone and you give them silk tassel or lobelia, you also want to give Jamaican dogwood. Somebody's fallen down and hurt themselves and you're giving things like hops to help with pain, you might also give Jamaican dogwood. In other words, it's an adjunct or an adjuvant that increases the efficiency of other pain relieving herbs with having some pain relieving properties itself. But the real advantage of Jamaican dogwood is that it's non-sedative. So you just have that. It's really useful. Tastes a little bit weird, not too bad. You can also use it by itself to take the edge off pain, but I generally put it in formula. It's also useful for sleep if your body hurts and that's why you can't fall asleep. So when you lay down at night, your adrenaline has maintained, it's kept all the pain signaling down. Now you lay down and you go into parasympathetic mode and you can feel pain radiating your body. Jamaican dogwood is really helpful there. So it's helpful for sleep by helping the body by feeling less pain as you lay down, whether it's stiffness or arthritis or whatever body pains you feel. Again, though, often the Jamaican dogwood will be helpful with other pain relievers, things like kava kava, which is another good sleep aid, and hops. Still with me? Anybody? How about you in the chats over there? Anybody in the chat still present? This is good. Just take a break. My throat, I don't know why. I don't know if this happens to anybody else. My throat gets much drier when I talk to a computer than when I talk to a people. If I was in this room talking to human beings, I must talk differently, right? Because it could be AI is sucking my voice out to use or some for some nefarious reasons of its own. Don't do that, AI. Or more likely, I talk to computers differently than I talk to live human beings, which just seems weird. I'm gonna have to think about this. That's why I have plenty of fluids here because my voice just dries out. All right, let's see what kind of questions you have before I move on. We have about 6 or 7 more herbs. Let's see what got there. Um, Martha asks if eating the leaves of betony is as useful. That's a great question, Martha. I'm laughing because it doesn't taste good. But so many of us make medicines from the plants rather than just eat the plant. I would guess it would probably work, but I've never tried eating the leaves of wood betony. I've never tried eating a lot of these plants. I just make medicine. Virginia gave us a great, good tasting tea with hawthorn, tulsi, hibiscus, and linden. That does sound delicious. Um, Judy asked if Gotu kola can help with plantar fasciitis. Um, I don't know. The plantar tissue is different. I'm sorry, Judy. You can try it. I would probably, I don't know if I don't think I would do it topically because the tissue on the skin of the foot is so tough compared to other tissue because, of course, we walk on it. If you try it, I would probably take it internally. Vanessa got snow in Montana last week. Sorry, Vanessa. I'll be in the Kootenays in a few weeks. See what's happening there. Virginia asked, will they be able to find the recording? Probably yes. It'll probably be my either Facebook, probably be on Facebook or Instagram. Kristen says, love the Long Island accent. From the mall and from the coffee shops, we all thank you, Kristen. I'm going to go back to herbs in a minute. Virginia asks, are there contraindications with hops and antidepressants? I think yes. I don't think it's dramatic. I would be careful about taking, so the question is contraindications. Can you take hops with antidepressants? I would say I would be careful with hops and benzodiazepines like Klonopin, right? I'm not sure I'd worry that much about hops and SSRIs, which I more likely are called antidepressants. But I would be careful about the stronger benzodiazepines, and hops. I'm not really sure they would have a negative effect. But I have given people who are taking SSRIs, moment here. Many of the people taking SSRIs, like Lexapro, Prozac, take them for anxiety, not for depression. So I have given people hops for people taking antidepressants for their anxiety, and it's been helpful. I wouldn't give hops to people who are depressed and I'm trying to help the depression because hops is sedative and a little depressing in its own. So that's what I mean. And so the second part of this question is they have a friend on SSRIs and trouble sleeping. It would probably be safe. I would just start with a small amount. It's hard to know. But I've given hops with people at SSRIs and I haven't had negative feedback about it yet. Michael, your question is just a little bit too complicated for this. I apologize. Judy asked, do I make a salve with devil's claw? I've never made it. I've never used devil's claw externally. I've only used devil's claw internally. Martha asked, how do I use Elecampane root for COPD? Martha, I pretty much have used it either as a tincture or a glycerite, and usually it's usually mixed with other herbs, again, like with pleursy root, maybe mullein leaf and other plants, and it's usually taken a few times a day. And usually you have to take it for a couple, you're usually going to easily go through a 4-ounce or a larger bottle. It's going to take a couple of weeks often for the inflammation to go down, at least a week or two. So Iris has an example. They put a dropper of lobelia into their toddler's mouth, who immediately puked. That seems possible and actually likely since you wrote that. Um, yeah, so I can say that for toddlers, lobelia is used externally, not internally. So for young children with asthma, I haven't done this, but I have friends that have done this, that if they have young children who have asthma, they take lobelia tincture and they rub it on the front of their chest or the back of their chest. And they've said they've had good reactions to that. Kristen asked, can you use lobelia in children with asthma? Depends on their age and their sensitivity. It's not particularly dangerous. You just have to use a very low dose. Is lobelia, I don't use lobelia. Penny asks, is lobelia used internally in tincture form? The answer is yes. Lobelia is used internally in tincture form. And for COPD, I'm going to be using it alongside of pleurisy root, Asclepias tuberosa, mullein leaf, and Elecampane. But I want to say, Penny, in that formula, it's just a very small part lobelia. The lobelia in that is actually used to help the body as an adjuvant to help increase the efficiency of those herbs, because lobelia doesn't help COPD. I'll say it again. Lobelia doesn't really help COPD because it's a bronchodilator, not an anti-inflammatory, which is the problem. I mean, with COPD, but it has to do with breakdown of alveoli. All right. So out of the probably one of the last rounds of questions, you know that. And next herb, Japanese knotweed. So Japanese knotweed has had a number of scientific names. Its most current one is Reinotria japonica, Japanese knotweed. It's currently Reinotria japonica. And it is a really useful anti-inflammatory. So first, nobody should ever plant Jamaican, Japanese knotweed again, anywhere ever. The plant has fully established itself. It is super crazy, fragilistic, docious, weedy where it grows. So there's always some places to gather it. Make sure if you gather your own Japanese knotweed, it's the root of Japanese knotweed, Reinotria japonica, that's used. Make sure to gather it, though, in a place that's not polluted. The roots of all plants pull up stuff. So you have to always be careful when you're gathering roots of plants, particularly. That said, Japanese knotweed is one of my favorite herbs. These are all my favorite herbs for joint inflammation, particularly due to Lyme. So if I'm talking about arthritis, again, rheumatoid, sometimes helpful. Osteo, sometimes helpful. And again, just what I think of as general everyday arthritis, because you have repetitious motions and now your fingers are stiff or your joints are stiff. I think, yeah, the two plants that I find most helpful for arthritis, three plants that I find most helpful, the three plants that I find most helpful for arthritis in general is Japanese knotweed, yucca, and whatever the other one and devil's claw. And they're a really good combination and pretty safe. Japanese knotweed is just really rich in a compound called resveratrol, which is really strong antioxidant action. And that might be why it's helping as an anti-inflammatory. It's reducing cellular damage. So every once in a while, I'll go out and gather a bunch of Japanese knotweed in fall, and then I'll tincture it up. And I use the heck out of it. And I work at a free clinic. So moment on that. So I work at the Ithaca Free Clinic and have for 19 years. And I'm at practice as a clinical herbalist there. And we see people either in person or telehealth. So if you're asking me questions about like plantar fasciitis or other personal health issues, I'm not answering them here. I just want to cover these herbs. But I will see people either online, telehealth, or in person. The big caveat is we don't send herbs to anybody. So I'll make recommendations, but I'm trying to be really clear here. I work at a free clinic. You're welcome to see me at the free clinic. I'm usually there on Thursdays. I will be gone for a month and a half during the summer. Um, but otherwise, I'm there very regularly. So yeah, you have to get free clinic. It's amazing. It's an integrated clinic. I have talked about it for hours. I just feel so appreciative that I live in a town that has an integrated free clinic and I'm a part of it. That's enough about Japanese knotweed. The next is rose. So rose, any aromatic rose will do, right? So as long as it's not like some hybrid rose that's very plush and gauche, but without any aromatics, I like to use any of the aromatic roses. I like to use the buds and the petals are the parts that I use. And they've got to be one of the most well-liked. Not everybody likes roses, but many people like rose. It makes a fantastic glycerite, rose glycerite, which really will make the flavor of most herbs, except like chaparral or hops, tinctures taste better. And rose by itself is an anxiolytic, helps reduce anxiety. It's a nervine. And unlike some of the other anxiolytic nervines, some of the other herbs that are good for the nervous system, for anxiety, is that rose can be used as needed. There's something about the flavor of rose, maybe the medicinal property as well, that helps people sigh, like a good sigh, not like sighing that you wish I would stop talking, like Seven Song, like that sigh, but more like anxious, and you take something like the shoulders drop a little bit. Rose is good that way. I think a lot of it is association, and I'm all for it. Whatever helps people feel, gets them through the day, I appreciate. So it's like other plants like Gotu kola, as somebody mentioned, rose is actually excellent in skincare. It's nutritious, it's a good flavor, and like a few other plants, it's both good for anxiety and for depression. It seems safe to use with almost any medication. And for some people, it will also help their cognitive function. What I mean by that, it's not like startling strong like Calamus, but I think for a lot of people who have depression and anxiety, it just messes with the mind. And so, right, so instead of enjoying life or having a good time or even being present, you just have this, it's just hard for the mind to function properly. It's hard to see things well. It's hard to be present. And I think rose can help with that, especially taken over time. But I really think it just helps with anxiety and depression, which helps people's minds work better. That probably would have been a much better way to say it. So again, it can be taken acute or as a tonic. And really, it's one of the herbs that will increase the flavor of most other medicines. There are people that don't like the flavor of rose, but generally it's one of the most liked plants species. The next one is rosemary. So rosemary used to be Salvia rosmarinus, but now rosemary is Salvia. I think I said that wrong. Rosemary is now Salvia rosmarinus. It used to be Rosmarinus officinalis. I don't know why I'm saying. I'm a botanist. That's why I'm saying this. So rosemary is Salvia rosmarinus. I find an exceptionally helpful plant. A lot of it probably has to do with its fairly high amounts of something called rosmarinic acid. Rosmarinic acid is also found in mint plants. It's found in self-heal, prunella. It's found in lavender. It's found in hyptis. Rosmarinic acid is found in many plants in the mint family, the Lamiaceae. And rosmarinic acid has strong antioxidant properties. Oxidation is basically, there's no basic to it. Oxidation causes cellular damage. It's always happening in our bodies all the time, all our lives. And we have natural ways to reduce these free radicals in our bodies. We make chemicals to stop that. But especially after injury or illness, you want to add herbs that are high in antioxidants to increase the body's efficiency at clearing out free radicals. So if you had a flu or if you were in a car accident, right, very different things, there's a lot of cellular damage. As your body is repairing that, you create a lot of free radicals. You want to scavenge those free radicals, free radical scavenger, otherwise known as an antioxidant. But really the trick is almost all plants have lots of antioxidants. So it's just making sure you have vegetables in your diet and fruits. And then you'll have plenty of it. And then some herbs like rosemary and the other mint families, they're rich in rosmarinic acid as an antioxidant. And remember that with Japanese knotweed, resveratrol, high in Japanese knotweed, is also an excellent antioxidant. So they're reducing cellular damage. So I am getting bar mitzvahed and my voice is cracking again. So it's a terrible thing to do to 13-year-olds. Make them up, go in front of a bunch of people. Obviously, I'll just stop there, except in my mind. So because of rosemary's free radical scavenging, i.e. antioxidants property, it's often used for neurological damage. In other words, it's one of the many herbs to use post-traumatic brain injury. Lots of things have to be done for this. It's not just a matter of rosemary, but used alongside other herbs, and really any place where you've been sick or injured and you're trying to reduce these kinds of damages. I usually use rosemary in really small amounts. There's really no major safety component, there's really no safety problem with rosemary, but it's really strong tasting, and I usually put it in a smaller part in formulas, which I'm about to get into. So rosemary could be helpful for injuries, whether it's to the brain or other parts of the body. It's considered neuroprotective, meaning helping repair nerves. And it's another herb that can be used to help cognitive function after injury or illness. So once again, you've had Lyme disease, and now your memory is not what it once was. Your concentration is not what it once was. You might have brain fog. Rosemary is really helpful. It's almost always part of a formula. It's a small part, but I am such a rosemary fan at this point in my life. Some of the other herbs, like I mentioned, might work this way, but at this point, I've just been accustomed to using rosemary. It also could be helpful for depression, especially if depression comes after a stressful time. So you're taking care of a very sick relative. It's a very stressful time, but maybe that ends somehow. And now you've moved into a depressive state after all that stress. Or maybe you're just going back to school and there's a lot going on. And then afterwards, depression sets in after a stressful time. Rosemary could be helpful there. And also, rosemary could be helpful for if you're losing hair. So it's not so much a hair colorant, but if your hair is falling out, especially due to stress, rosemary can be used. This way it's used externally. I usually combine rosemary with nettles and horsetail and oats. And you just make a tea with just a small pot of rosemary. And after your hair gets wet, you put the tea in it, you rub the tea into your scalp, and then your hair smells slightly like herb tea. And you just let it sit there. You don't wash the tea out of your hair. So that rosemary is a hair rinse. That's actually quite a popular herb that we use at the clinic. There's just one or two more herbs I want to cover, maybe three. So this one is very specific, and I'm talking about it because it's an uncommon use of a common plant. This is the root of the mullein plant. Now, this is Verbascum thapsus, mullein, and this is the common mullein. This is the one you'll see growing in gravel on roadsides. So since you're using the root, make sure you gather it from a clean place. Mullein root is a bladder strengthener. I have no idea how it really works. I mean, I don't know. it's patho. I don't know. I guess it's right. I don't know how it works, but I know what it does. So for people who have chronic urinary urgency, mullein root can be really helpful. So it is not helpful for BPH, benign prostatic hypertrophy. It is not helpful for the urgency and frequency associated for urinary tract infections. That's because you have an infectious agent. The other is because the prostate is the problem. But if you're just somebody who, like, when you have to pee, has to pee right away, mullein root sometimes is very helpful. You can also try it for nocturia. Nocturia, I'm saying the C a little bit harder there, nocturia. Um, Nocturia is when you have to get up at night to urinate. And so many people will have to get up at night to urinate, but if you have a lot of urgency with that, urgency, by the way, just means that when you feel like you have to pee, you really feel like you feel like you're going to pee yourself if you don't get to a toilet really soon. So I would suggest that I use the tincture of it. It's the only thing I've used so far. I've never tried the tea yet, but I've mostly used the tincture of the fresh root of Verbascum thapsus. And for some people, it's been really helpful for it. Again, though, not so much for UTIs or BPH, because those have different aspects to them, but it's just for people who basically, you might say you have a weak bladder. And so you still, what will it do? It will make you feel like it will help you hold your urine in without you feeling like you have to run to the bathroom all the time. Sometimes it helps with frequency, but really what it reduces is urgency. And for our last plant of today, I'm going to discuss prickly ash, which sometimes I think should be my other name. What kind of ash? So prickly ash there's a number of them, but there's one species I use more than the others. So prickly ash is xanthoxylum with a Z, xantho, which means yellow, xylem, which means wood. So that xanthoxylum, and then clava hercules. Clava means club, Hercules means Hercules. So it means yellow wood, club of Hercules. But anyway, xanthoxylum clava hercules. I think that's the stronger. There's a few xanthoxylums. So this plant has a lot of uses. The first use is it increases bioavailability. I was saying another herb. I was saying with Lobelia that I don't think that Lobelia helps other herbs work better by increasing bioavailability. I think Lobelia helps by doing something to the parasympathetic nervous system. With prickly ash, I think it increases bioavailability. So in other words, you're putting an herb in your mouth. Now it has to go through your esophagus and stomach into your small intestine, and from your small intestine into your bloodstream. And some herbs, this is often you hear like black pepper used with turmeric, but I tend to use prickly ash to increase the bioavailability of formulas that I give people that seem like they don't easily get absorbed or get distributed to the proper tissues. So in other words, if I'm giving somebody Hawthorn for the heart, I often add some prickly ash because not only do I want the Hawthorn to be absorbed into the bloodstream from the small intestine, I also want the Hawthorn to be distributed to the blood vessels feeding the heart muscles. So I use prickly ash to increase the efficiency of other herbs, especially when they're like organs that are harder to get to. For instance, in this case, the heart. So prickly ash is an adjunct to other therapies, increases their bioavailability. I want to mention one other herb that increases bioavailability is cayenne pepper. But the problem with cayenne is that some people, the heat could be too much for people. So I'm not going to talk about cayenne, but I'm saying my two favorite herbs to increase the bioavailability of internal formulas is prickly ash, which doesn't have the heat, and capsicum, which is probably a little stronger, but it adds the heat. Prickly ash is one of the only herbs I use that I find helpful for peripheral neuropathy, damage to nerves done by either repetitive motion, hammering, if you're a carpenter or somebody uses a hammer, or due to things like diabetes. Again, it's not going to cure everybody's. I mean, you have to work on the diabetes, but prickly ash is one of the few herbs that I've seen restore the sensation to tissues that were getting numb or having pins and needles. You can use it externally, though mostly I use it internally. It can also be used for nerve pain, though I haven't seen it be very effective for fibromyalgia, like the classic nerve pain, but really for nerve damage. So it's something you might want to use. You've had surgery on your shoulder. Let's say you had a rotator cuff surgery, and now your hand's a little bit numb. That's due to nerve damage from surgery, which might have been very helpful. And then taking the prickly ash. You're going to take it 2-3, usually 1 to 3 times a day, usually for a couple of weeks at least. So prickly ash I use for 2 things, a bunch of things. But really, these are the 2 main ones: to increase the bioavailability of other herbs in formula, and to help with nerve damage or peripheral neuropathy, which might come from injury or might come from disease state or damage due to things like diabetes. I've also, so I'm going to say this because I haven't seen it helpful here, but I'm going to let you know. Maybe somebody else will find it helpful. I've heard that it's helpful for Bell's palsy. I haven't seen that, which is basically usually a virus that hits the nerve, the trigeminal nerves, and causes like whatever nerves they were. I'm forgetting the face. Anyway, you get a drooping down of one side of your face, and I've heard that it could be helpful for that, but I haven't had success. But I heard a number of people say it. So that's one of the few things I'm repeating without having clinical experience. And that, folks, I will read the questions, and then I will mow a lawn, a very large lawn. So Carissa asks, can I harvest the root of Japanese knotweed when the areoles are visible? Yes. So Carissa's question is basically, can I harvest knotweed when it's above ground as well? It might be a little bit weaker, but I think you can find it as well. But I find it pretty easy. So Carissa, like the stems look like bamboo. And even here in the Northeast, I mean, where we get a lot of snow, those stems tend to stay up all winter long. I find it very easy to find Japanese in winter. But if you can only get it while if it's in full flower, probably the worst time to gather it. So when the shoots come up, a little less worse, full flower, even less strong, then back in the ground, better. So I would suggest getting it during those times. Kristen asks about resveratrol and anti-cancer properties in Japanese knotweed. I haven't researched it enough to know. Sorry. Probably helpful. Probably helpful for if there's inflammation involved. And Carissa loves their pink wild rose tincture. Yes. Christina asks, do I use rose for grief? This gets a little contentious. I don't really use any herbs specifically for grief. I use herbs for the nervous system surrounding it. I'm just making it way complicated. One could certainly use rose for grief, but I think that grief is many forms. It could be depressive or anxious. So I guess for me, depending on how the grief is showing itself, is the herbs that I'll give. But rose, people like rose, and the glycerite is just really nice tasting. Carissa asks about most of these herbs. Are they good in apple cider vinegar? Vinegars are really hard for most people to take. They don't last as long. I really don't use apple cider vinegars. If the person can't take alcohol, that's something I should have been said at the beginning. Many people cannot take alcohol, whether they're sober or for other reasons. Then I usually use glycerites or capsules. But a lot of people use vinegars. The only herb that I mentioned today that I use in vinegar is Lobelia. None of the other herbs I use in vinegars. Kristen asked, do I believe that mullein root would be helpful for prolonged uresis and uresis? And boys, I have to say, Kristen, I would try it. I don't have much experience with it, but I think it'd be worth a try. I just don't have that many patients that have asked me for this, for usually young boys. But it seems if they're willing to try it, I would certainly give it a try. Peggy asks about gathering mullein root. I will gather up. So mullein root is generally a biennial. It flowers the second year. So I like to gather mullein root the fall of the first year or spring of the second year. Fall of the first year, spring of the second year. Yana asks about insights using mullein root to assist in herniated discs. I know a couple of herbalists who have done that, but I've never tried it. I don't have any personal connection, so apologies. Vanessa asks, can you use prickly ash and lobelia together? Why would I do that? I guess, Vanessa, I'm not really sure. I'd have to figure out why I would do that. I don't see any reason not to do that, but I don't know if I've ever combined them. Penny asks, can you use prickly ash for trigeminal neuralgia? And you're right, that's really difficult to treat. I don't know if I've used it for trigeminal neuralgia, Penny, but I would absolutely try it. Also, my memory's not great, so I might have given it. But if somebody came to me with trigeminal neuralgia, prickly ash, probably used maybe externally and internally, would be one of the first herbs that I would consider giving. The amount of time to wait to give Oregon grapefruit is cyclical vomiting and don't want to throw up the herbs. Oh, Michael. So when people have bacterial or viral gastrointestinal infections, like Shigella or Cryptosporidium, they vomit a lot. And it's very hard to stop the vomiting. It's a whole thing. So basically what I do is I don't give strong tasting herbs. So here's the question. If somebody's vomiting and you want to give Oregon grapefruit, how long do you have to wait to give the Oregon grapefruit? There's no specific answer to that. Basically, what I would be doing is giving them small amounts of water. And when they stop vomiting the water, then I might consider giving them the Oregon grape. But first, I want to make sure that the vomiting has stopped because strong flavors will certainly bring it on. Winter, I think it's something. So Virginia asks, it's just a few more moments here, and then I'll sign off. Virginia asks that her sister has taken gabapentin for neuropathy. Sometimes gabapentin helps with some neuropathy, sometimes it doesn't. So her question is, can you take the prickly ash with the gabapentin? I feel she first writes, or they first write, not sure if you can ask. I'm not really sure if I want to answer that here because I'm not really sure. There's too many things involved to make a pronouncement of could you use prickly ash with gabapentin in your sister's predicament. I'm not really sure. I would have to, it'd be more questions. Yeah, but look it up, more information. All right, everybody. Whew. 2 hours done. Thank you for being here. Have a fantastic Mother's Day, no matter whom you are. And I'll hang out for a minute. I'd love to watch the appreciation scroll. And I hope this was helpful for you. So I'll see you at the next class.